Hi, I'm Nikki and welcome to the Preppy Possum. Today I'm going to lead you step by step through a painting. All right, let's paint some lightning bugs. So we're going to grab a huge brush, it's like a 1-inch brush or something, and dry it off on a paper towel. And we're going to grab some navy blue with a little bit of black. So some navy blue and some black. And we're just going to go ahead and throw a thin layer all over the whole canvas. So just grab a bunch of paint and go for it. And don't worry if it's a little streaky, but just load your brush up with a lot. And if it's looking like too dark, grab a little bit more navy. If you want it to be a little bit darker so it looks more like nighttime, just grab a little bit more black. Just navy blue and black, grab a bunch of paint, and we're just gonna cover our whole canvas. And you can even paint your edges too. So we're gonna keep grabbing that navy and black and just grab a bunch of paint and go for it. We wanna cover the whole canvas. You want it to be a pretty night sky. I love lightning bugs or fireflies. Depending on where you're from, people call them different things. I grew up calling them lightning bugs, but a lot of people call them fireflies. And don't worry about the streaks. I think that just kind of adds to it. You can just kind of do like a little rainbow motion, like a little whoop. And I think that looks better when your background's streaky and you have that kind of motion going on. So if you just want to kind of do like a little rainbow kind of motion. So I definitely wouldn't worry about going like straight side to side or up and down or anything. I think it looks better to kind of do a little whoop to fill it in. And don't worry if like a few parts of your canvas are a little bit darker than others. That just kind of adds some contrast and makes it look good. So now, once we have our background done, and then once you have a good thin coat on the background, so once you get that, then just wipe off your extra on the paper towel, chunk that one in the water, and let's grab a little bit smaller brush. So like a number 4 is a good size, and dry it off a little bit. And we're gonna grab some like really light blue, so almost a white, and then maybe like a pool blue, but some really light blues to get you started. So number 4 brush and really light blues. And we're just gonna skip in from the right-hand edge of our canvas at least 3 or 4 inches and skip up 3 or 4 inches. And we're gonna throw a little straight line. And don't worry that your background's still wet because we're gonna come back and hit this again. And then once you get that first line, we'll just grab a little bit more of the light blues because you always wanna have a bunch of paint on your brush and then just be really light with it. And we'll skip over another 4 or 5 inches, just depending on how big you want your jar. And we'll throw another line. And then once you have both of the little sides of your jar, then right off the top, right off the left-hand side, we'll just do a little whoop, kind of like the left-hand side of a rainbow, just kind of curve it in. And then right off the right-hand side, we'll just curve that in. And then once you have both those little whoops, we'll go ahead and do like a wiggly little line that just goes up for just like an inch. You're just trying to give the impression of the threads of the jar. So just a little wiggly little line. on both sides. And then once you have that on both sides, we're going to throw a droopy little line that just connects the top left to the top right. And don't worry if your jar's bigger than mine, smaller. Especially a lot of those old jars, they came in all different sizes. And then go ahead and throw you another droopy little line, like at the like from the bottom of your threads. And then we'll just keep the lighter blues on our brush, and we're just going to kind of thicken up this left-hand side just a little. I would make it a little bit thicker at the top left. And then over here on the right-hand side, I would do the same kind of thing, but I would just kind of brush to the left. That way the thinnest part of your stroke is over on the left-hand side. So kind of take it from the right to that left-hand side. Keep taking that all the way down that right-hand side, just to get you a little bit of light all the way down there. And don't worry about it being streaky, because we're going to come back and throw another layer, so don't worry about that. All right, now let's go ahead and grab, while we have that same brush, don't even really have to wipe it off, we're going to grab a little bit of that, like some medium blues, so like some pool blue and a little bit of turquoise, and we're just going to throw a little bit of that right inside the light blue that we just did. So right where the light touches the dark, we're just going to throw just a little bit of this. And we'll do the same thing on the right hand side. So just kind of brush, just whoop, whoop, whoop. Just a little bit right there where the light touches the dark. And then we'll come back and hit that again too. All right, well that's a good little start on our jar. So we'll go ahead and wipe off our extra paint on the paper towel and chunk that one in the water. And let's grab a little bit bigger brush. Let's see here. I'm trying to find like a number 6. That'll be a good size. So grab like a number 6 and dry it off. And now we're gonna grab some like dark greens. So I would grab like a hunter green and forest green, so just kind of some darker shades of green together. So some darker greens, and load your brush with a lot of paint. And we're just gonna start at the very bottom edge of our canvas. So a lot of green on your brush, load it up, be real light. We're gonna start at the bottom edge, and we're gonna do some brush strokes that come up. And whenever you're throwing your brush stroke up, you just wanna be a little bit lighter as it comes up. And always go down to up. That way the thinnest part of your stroke is gonna be at the top. But start along this bottom edge, and just load your brush with a lot of paint and just be really light. And if you're OCD, kind of close one eye or something, because you don't want to make them too perfect. Especially like you'll see in just a second when we add some more on top. But go ahead and do that all across the bottom. And then once you get that, so once we have a good start to the bottom row, then we're gonna add some more on top of it. So we're gonna do kind of like a second row, but some of these you want to start like lower than others, just so it won't look like distinct little rows. So kind of get a little cray-cray, make sure that some start lower, some start higher. And then we'll just keep adding the grass. So just kind of keep skipping around, and our goal is to just kind of work our way all the way up to the jar. So all the way up to the bottom of your jar, you want to kind of, we're gonna make it look like the jar's kind of sitting in the grass. So we want to cover up the very bottom of the jar. But just like I said before, you don't want like perfect rows, so kind of get a little crazy. You want some grass blades to come up a little bit higher than others. And don't worry if you get a little bit of that blue kind of mixing in, because we're gonna come back and throw a bunch of light grass anyway. So it's all good. All right, and then just once again, check your bottom edge, because you wanna make sure you have a bunch coming up off of that. You don't want it to look like you just jumped up and started getting grassy. So make sure you have a bunch down there. While we're doing that, so now that we have like a bunch of dark green and it's covering the bottom, so it's looking good, let's grab a little bit of the limey green, so like a lighter green with some dark, so kind of both of those together, and we're gonna skip around and throw some light grass on there. And whenever you're doing these, like really jump around. You don't want it to look like they're like perfectly placed, so kind of skip around and get crazy. And so keep skipping all around. You just want to throw a bunch of these. And we'll come back and throw more later too. And if you have trouble getting small, I'm using a number 6 right now, but you can use a number 4 if you have trouble getting small, because like later on I might switch out and throw some with a little bit smaller brush too. But just skip around, and whenever you're doing these light ones, make sure you get some light ones right off that bottom edge. So just like we did with the dark, you want to make sure you have some. That way it doesn't just look like you jumped up and started having the light grass. And then once we have a bunch of light, we're going to let that dry for a second, because we're going to come back and probably throw some more grass on there. So just wipe off your extra paint, and we'll chunk that one in the water. And let's grab a number 4 brush again. So a little bit smaller brush. And we're gonna grab like a golden yellow. So like kind of like a dark yellow. And now we're gonna throw the centers of our bugs. So for our lightning bugs or fireflies, whichever one you call them, we want those to be like pretty small. So think like the end of a pencil eraser kind of size, because we're just gonna do the middle part right now. So I would start like in your jar, and in the jar I would throw like at least 3 or 4. You could throw more, but remember, kind of start small, because we're gonna add the little rings around it to make it look like it's lighting up. But I would throw like at least 3 or 4. And then once you have a few in your jar, I would even throw like a little half of one kind of right at the top of the jar. So we have one that's kind of coming out. And then once you have one right at the top, like your little half of one, now we're gonna throw some more, like a bunch more that kind of meander towards that top left-hand corner of your canvas. And you can do these, you know, however you want. I just would make sure that they're not like in a perfect pattern, because you want it to kind of look more natural and less intentional. So kind of skip around, and you can have a few stragglers that hang down lower. And leave a little bit of space in between, just so you have the room to like throw our little rings that kind of makes, you know, gives the impression that it's lighting up. And I would even, when you get over here to the edge, I would even throw like at least a little half a bug over here on the edge, just so it doesn't look like they just stop. And if you want to, because that still looks a little perfect to me, I would throw like, you know, maybe like one hanging down here or something, just to get it a little not quite as perfect. You can even throw 2. All right, so that's a good start to our bugs. Now we'll wipe off our excess and chunk that one in the water. And let's grab like a teeny tiny brush. So like a number 1. And dry it off. And now we're gonna grab kind of those same colors. You could even grab a little bit lighter of a yellow with some white. So some pale yellow with some bright white. So we're gonna have that number 1, so teeny tiny in the white and the bright yellow together. And now we're gonna do some like light little rings around our lightning bugs or fireflies. But you just don't want them to look like flying eggs. So you wanna be really light so you don't get too heavy, because you don't want it to look like it's a little flying egg. So we're gonna be really light and just barely touch, because you still wanna see a little bit of that blue kind of peeking through. And this is one of those things that you're gonna get better at as you do them. So I would do one in one place and then skip somewhere else and do another one, because you're gonna get better at it. So I would make sure you kind of skip around. And if you do happen to get too heavy, I'll show you in a second, but we can go back and add a little bit of dark to thin it down. So I would do one place, skip somewhere else, do another, and just keep doing that to all your little bugs. And whenever you're throwing these little rings, make sure that they kind of touch the center, so you're not leaving a big space between the center and the rings. So you want some of these light little parts that we're throwing on here to touch the middle. And you're just gonna keep doing that and keep skipping around, because you'll get better as you do it. And don't worry if it gets a little heavy or you fill it in too solid. Just let it dry, because we can come back and add some dark to it. Sometimes when I have a bunch of paint on my brush, I just kind of skip around, so that way I don't put like all the paint in one place on one bug. And some of mine are getting a little too yellow, so I can just grab more white, and I can come back later too and add some lights and darks. Just want to get all your little bugs, kind of back up, double check, make sure you got them all. So we have a little layer on them all, not perfect, but we can come back and thin it down with some blue and add more lights anywhere just to make them really shine, but that's a good start. So now that we have that, just kind of wipe off your extra, and we'll rinse that one out in the water, because we're going to use a teeny tiny brush again. So wipe it off and rinse it out and dry it off. And let's grab some more of that really light blue. And now we're gonna skip up to the top of our jar, and we're gonna throw a little line that just barely leans up. And we're just gonna skip over our bug, because you just kind of want to give the impression that he's coming out of the top of our jar. And then once you have that, Then we're gonna skip to the little part where the threads go, and we're gonna throw some more lines that kind of droop a little bit, but these don't have to go all the way left to right. So you're just kind of giving the impression of threads. And it's getting a little too light in there, so we'll come back with some darks in just a second. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and wipe that one off and chunk it in the water. And let's grab like a number 4 again and dry it off. And we're gonna grab a little bit more of the lighter blues that we started with. So some of that really light blue and pool blue. So some real light blues. And we're just gonna thicken up kind of where we had that blue already. So like over here through the left-hand side of our jar. And so you wanna be a little bit thicker up towards the top left of that little loop. And then we're gonna do the same thing over here on the right. We're gonna thicken that up just a little. And it's not quite dry, so we might have to come back and throw a little bit more. And then once we have that, we'll grab a little bit more of that turquoise and pool blue, so you don't have to wipe out your brush. Just grab a little bit of like turquoise and pool blue. You can tell I'm not big on brush wiping. I like the colors to kind of mix together. A little bit of turquoise, and then we're just gonna do some strokes kind of left to right, just kind of droopy little strokes, blend in right there where the light touches the dark. And now that we kind of have another layer through both sides of that, let's even grab a little bit of that navy blue, so kind of like a background kind of color with some turquoise. So it's like you're grabbing the 2 dark blues together, so some turquoise and some navy. And we're just gonna kind of blend it right where the light touches the dark. So over here on the left-hand side, I'll just do some streaks kind of up and down. And then over here on the right-hand side, I'll just do some streaks kind of left to right, just like we did before. And we might let that dry and come in with some more dark in a second because it's getting kind of light on us. And we'll go ahead and wipe that one off. And while we have that brush, I'll just kind of wipe it off and grab some more dark green, the 2 darker greens. So this time we're using like, still that number 4 and the darker green. So this way we can throw it in a few more skinny pieces of grass. So skip through. So you're not we're not doing quite as many this time, but just kind of skip through and you're throwing a few more of the dark. And make sure, I think it looks good for your top edge to not be like all the same height. So throw you a few that come up a little taller than others, just so it looks a little bit more wild. So then keep on skipping around, throw you a bunch of the dark green. And just load your brush with a lot of paint and be real light. And that's how you'll get that good thin stroke. And then just remember, just like before, you always want to start down low and come up with your stroke. That way the thinnest part of your grass blade will be at the top. So always down to up and then do another stroke, down to up. And then I don't know why it is, but sometimes when people do grass, they do them like in a pattern, like a bunch of V's. So if you have that going on, kind of resist it and go back in and throw some single blades. But once you have a bunch more dark, then I would grab some more of the slimy, limey, and dark green together. So kind of the 2 greens. And we're gonna skip around and throw us some more light. And just like you did before, you want some near the very bottom edge, some near the top. Just kind of skip all around, get kind of crazy. And it's gonna go on a lot lighter than it'll dry. So it's gonna dry a little bit darker. So don't worry if they're kind of going on and looking a little bit yellow or too bright, because it's gonna dry a little bit darker. But I think that's a good start. We're probably good with our grass. I think it's looking pretty good. And then wipe off your extra and chunk that one in the water. And let's grab a teeny tiny brush again, so like a number 1, and dry it off. And we're gonna grab some more of that like turquoise and dark blue. And now we're gonna skip up to the top of our jar, and we're just gonna throw a few little streaks just to give us some dark layers. So you still wanna do like droopy little lines. The trick is you just want some like darks and lights. So you still wanna see some of that night sky, but yet you wanna have some of the like, you know, kind of giving the impression that it's glass, but not trying to be too perfect with it. And if it gets too light on you, just grab some dark, come back in with the dark, and vice versa. Like if you have a lot of dark showing, just keep adding some of the turquoise and light streaks. And then we'll add just maybe a little bit of that kind of underneath your line at the top. I wouldn't add too much. And then once you have that, let's skip back to our bugs and give that a second to dry, because then we can come back and write on it. So just kind of wipe off your extra and rinse out a teeny tiny brush again, because we'll use that same one, and dry it off. And let's grab a little bit more white. So it's still the teeny tiny brush and the white and yellow, white and pale yellow, but I'd even grab a little bit more white. And this time we're gonna skip around to our bugs and throw just a few little light glares. So just still be real light with your brush. Don't hit all your bugs, but in just a few places. It'll kind of, no matter what you do, you want lights and darks, you want some contrast to make it look good. So I would add, just so we have a little bit more light. Plus now that they've dried a little bit, we can see better and see that we needed a little bit more light to it. I think that's pretty good for lightening it up. And then we can just kind of wipe off our extra and grab a little bit more navy blue. And now just in a few places, anywhere where your bugs got a little heavy, you can come back and just be real light and do that same kind of light motion. And that's gonna kind of give us a different blue too. So we kind of skipped around and threw a little bit of blue through our bugs just to kind of, guess, trim them up if yours did have the flying egg look going on. And then once you have that, we'll just kind of wipe it off and chunk it in the water. And let's grab a number 4. We'll fix up our jar a little bit before we do the words, because now it's a little bit more dry. So grab a number 4 again and dry it off. And we'll grab some more of the really light blues. And we'll just add a little bit more light through our jars. Just the edges kind of, just to thicken it up. And you could even do a little bit of that through the top too if you needed a few brighter little streaks. And now we'll grab some turquoise and dark blue. And now we'll throw a little bit of that just where the light touches the dark again. And whenever you're throwing it this time, just be real light and loosey-goosey, because you don't want it to be too perfect. And do the same thing over here. So just light, loosey-goosey, and throw your little whoop, 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 just back and forth, right there to kind of blend where the light touches the dark. And then we'll wipe that one off and chunk it in the water. And I think we're ready to write on our jar. It's looking pretty good. So we'll use a teeny tiny brush, so number 1, and dry it off. And we'll start by grabbing some of that like turquoise blue. And you can write whatever on your jar. I'm just gonna put ball. I'm a fan of ball jars. They don't pay me to say that. I really do like them. So just grab some of the turquoise, and I would start more to the left-hand side just to give yourself plenty of room. And back in the day, there were a lot of different styles of writing. So you can pull out one of your own jars if you want to check that out. Some of them had little whoops underneath, some didn't. So however you write, I would just do it like that. Some of them said Perfect Mason at the bottom, some of them didn't. But I would get the word ball on there, all in the turquoise first. And we'll go ahead and add a little whoop underneath too. And then once you get it on there with the turquoise and kind of thicken it up, then I would grab some of the really light blue and maybe even a little white, and we're just gonna highlight it. So kind of just go right on top. So right on the top of your word. I think that looks pretty good. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Be sure to check us out. We're on Cox Street in Asheboro. And be sure to check out our website, www.thepreppypossum.com.